connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, mga Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's program. The Philippines and the United States launched their largest ever joint military exercises today. A Philippine spokesman for Balikatan said in a live drill, the Allied forces would stage offshore for the first time. U.S. and Filipino forces would sink a 200-foot target vessel in Philippine territorial waters off the western province of Zambales this month in a coordinated airstrike and artillery bombardment, a maneuver sure to anger Beijing. Meanwhile, President Marcos said the Philippines will not allow any offensive actions from the bases it has opened for U.S. troops. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will discuss growing military ties with the Philippines today before heading to Vietnam and Japan, days after a new flare-up of tensions with China over Taiwan. And Vietnam has been showing efforts to reduce methane from rice cultivation by removing straw from the fields and turning it into mushrooms and organic fertilizer. First in our news, the Philippines and the United States launched their largest ever joint military exercises today. Nearly 18,000 troops are taking part in the annual exercises, dubbed Balikatan or shoulder to shoulder in Filipino, which for the first time will include a live fire drill in the South China Sea. As we all know, Beijing claims almost entirely. Balikatan will also include military helicopters landing on a Philippine island off the northern tip of the main island of Luzon, nearly 300 kilometers from Taiwan. It'll be the first time the exercises have been held under President Ferdinand Marcos. The Biden administration has been strengthening an arc of alliances in the Indo-Pacific to better counter China, including in a possible confrontation over Taiwan. About 12,200 U.S. military personnel, 5,400 Filipino forces, and 111 Australian counterparts are taking part, the largest in the Balikatan's three-decade history. Colonel Michael Logico, a Philippine spokesman for Balikatan, said in a live fire drill, the Allied forces would stage offshore for the first time. U.S. and Filipino forces would sink a 200-foot target vessel in Philippine territorial waters off the western province of Zambales this month in a coordinated airstrike and artillery bombardment. That location, facing the South China Sea and across the waters from the Taiwan Strait, would likely alarm China. However, the Philippines said the maneuver was aimed at bolstering the country's coastal defense and wasn't aimed at any country. Meanwhile, President Marcos said the Philippines will not allow any offensive actions from the bases it has opened to U.S. troops. Manila last week announced the locations of former military bases it is allowing the U.S. military to use on top of the 5 agreed under the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement known as EDCA. The deal allows U.S. troops to rotate through and store defense equipment and supplies. Take a look.
Unang-una, these are existing bases. Lahat ito existing na yan. Meron na talaga tayong meron na tayong kampo diyan na dati pa. At ang kaibahan lamang, our only treaty partner, which is the United States, we give them a chance to be able to come and help us in any way. Lalong-lalo na nag-umpisa talaga yan sa pagtulong sa mga disaster relief. Ngayon, ang reaction ng China ay hindi naman siguro katakataka dahil nag-aalala sila. Pero hindi tayo papayag ng Pilipinas, hindi tayo papayag na gamitin ang mga bases natin para sa kahit anong offensive na action. Ito ay para lamang tulungan ang Pilipinas kapag nangangailangan ng tulong ang Pilipinas. Kaya kung wala namang sumusugod sa atin, hindi na sila kailangan mag-alala dahil hindi naman sila natin lalabanan. At hindi naman, ang ginagawa lamang natin ay patuloy natin na pinapatibay natin ang depensa ng ating teritoryo, ang pagdepensa ng Republika.
Now, President Marcos' remarks came on the heels of China's third day of war games around Taiwan, where it simulated sealing off the self-ruled island. And the U.S.-Philippine drills also follow Monday's conclusion of a three-day Chinese military operation that simulated target strikes and a blockade of self-ruled Democratic Taiwan, which Beijing considers part of its territory. China launched 3 days of military exercises around self-ruled Taiwan on Saturday that saw it simulate targeted strikes and practice a blockade of the island. The show of force was a response to Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week, an encounter it had warned would provoke retaliatory measures. Meanwhile, 8 Chinese warships were still operating in waters around the island today, according to Taiwan's defense ministry, a day after Beijing declared an end to its massive war games. The ministry said it had detected 12 Chinese warships and 91 aircraft around the island on the final day of the drills, with 54 of the planes crossing into Taiwan's southwestern and southeastern air defense identification zone, or ADIZ. The ADIZ incursions were the highest recorded in a single day since October 2021. President Tsai Ing-wen condemned the military drills hours after they officially came to an end, saying,
国人同胞大家好，身为总统，我代表国家走向世界，无论是出访友邦、过境美国和国际友人交流，不只是行之有年，更是台湾人民的共同期待。然而，中国却借此发动军事演习，造成台湾海峡与区域的不稳定，这不是一个区域内大国的负责任态度。
Now, China on Monday held joint flights of jets and voyages of naval frigates after a U.S. warship sailed through the West Philippine Sea amid Beijing's encirclement exercises of Taiwan. Meanwhile, here are some reactions from the U.S. and the China governments.
We are, of course, closely monitoring those actions, and actions like these, they undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, which we continue to believe, and it is a viewpoint that we know our French allies share. There's no reason for the PRC to turn a transit which held precedent which is consistent with U.S. long-standing policy into something that it's not.
The spokesperson of the Eastern Theater Command of the PLA said that on April the 8th to the 10th, the PLA launched a combat readiness security patrol encircling the Taiwan island and carried out joint assault exercise. This is a stern warning to the provocative activities of Taiwan independent secessionist forces and their collusion with external forces, and a necessary move to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity. I would also like to add that the One China principle is a well-established international consensus and a norm in international relations.
In keeping with our belief that we won't be deterred from operating safely and responsibly in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific, consistent with international law. In keeping with that, the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group and Marine Amphibious Readiness Group are conducting routine operations in the Philippine Sea and will remain in that region. And I will say again that there is no reason to turn this transit into something that it was not.
The Foreign Ministry spokesperson already issued a statement on Tsai Ing-wen's transit through the U.S. and the collusion between the U.S. and Taiwan. China will take strong measures in response to safeguard our sovereignty and territorial integrity. As I said, the Eastern Theater Command of the PLA spokesperson also said that the security patrol and the exercise is a stern warning to the provocative activities of Taiwan independent secessionist forces and their collusion with external forces, and a necessary move to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
You said that this was a reaction that didn't need to happen. Is the U.S. sort of considering changing its posture in the Indo-Pacific, looking to what happened over the past 3 days over these military drills? Is that changing in any way the U.S.'s posture in the region?
No. As a matter of fact, today there are naval exercises in the Philippine Sea that the United States Navy is conducting. We're going to continue to fly and sail and operate in international waters and international airspace as required to protect our national security commitments. Again, I'd remind 5 of our 7 treaty alliances are in the Indo-Pacific region. We take those commitments very seriously.
Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will discuss growing military ties with the Philippines today before heading to Vietnam and Japan days after a new flare-up on tensions with China over Taiwan. The Philippines, Vietnam, and Japan all have long-standing territorial disputes with China that have grown more intense in recent years as Beijing flexes its muscle. Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will meet jointly in Washington with their Philippine counterparts in the first such joint talks in 7 years between the U.S. and its former colony. Last week, the Philippines announced 4 more military bases that U.S. forces will be able to use, including one on the northern Luzon Island, just 400 kilometers from Taiwan, a stark shift from a previous push by Manila to improve ties with China. After condemnation from Beijing, President Marcos said that Manila would not take any offensive actions from the 4 bases as well as from the 5 others agreed with Washington in a 2014 agreement.
Ang reaction ng China ay hindi naman siguro katakataka dahil nag-aalala sila, pero hindi naman gagamitin, hindi tayo papayag ng Pilipinas, hindi tayo papayag na gamitin ang mga bases natin para sa kahit anong offensive na action.
Months earlier, the U.S. reached a separate agreement with Japan, a fellow ally on the other side of Taiwan, to disperse U.S. forces across the southern island of Okinawa, another move seen as preparing for a potential Chinese move on Taiwan. Vietnam, where Blinken will head later this week before traveling to a Group of 7 meeting in Japan, has also sought closer defense cooperation with the United States despite bitter war memories. The leader of another key U.S. ally, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, pays a state visit to Washington on April 26. The U.S. effort to rally Asian allies comes after French President Emmanuel Macron raised eyebrows following a state visit to Beijing by saying that European allies of the U.S. should not get caught between Beijing and Washington in the standoff over Taiwan. President Joe Biden's administration and France played down the remarks.
We are again, comfortable and confident in the terrific bilateral relationship we have with France and the relationship that the president has with President Macron and the fact that we're working together on so many different issues. And the French are stepping up in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, they're conducting naval operations even as you and I are speaking right now in the Indo-Pacific, all in keeping with a concerted effort by all of us, this vast alliance or network of alliances and partnerships that we have to continue to make sure that we're standing up for stability, security, prosperity, and a free and open Indo-Pacific.
And tonight's other news, it seems we can barely catch our breath before another mass shooting rocks another American city. There was a deadly shooting at an elementary school in Nashville 2 weeks ago. And today, it happened in a bank in Louisville, Kentucky, in what the city's mayor called an evil act of targeted violence. A 25-year-old bank employee opened fire at his workplace in the U.S. state of Kentucky, killing 5 people and wounding at least 8 others in a live-streamed attack before police shot and killed him. After an initial death toll of 4, Louisville authorities announced in the evening that a 5th victim, a 57-year-old woman, had died of her injuries. Let's listen in.
The shooter was confirmed to be dead on the scene. We do not know exactly the circumstances of his death at this time. 5 people have been confirmed to have been killed inside. At least 6 were transported to University of Louisville Hospital, including 1 officer with various injuries. We are unable to confirm the status of those who have been transported at this time.
Now, police identified the gunman in this latest U.S. mass killing as a white man named Connor Sturgeon and said he was an employee of Old National Bank located in downtown Kentucky, Kentucky's largest city.
The investigation, I want to reiterate, is ongoing. This will be a long scene. It will take pretty much into the night. So I still ask that the public avoid the area. I want to reiterate that there is no active threat. We believe this is a lone gunman involved in this that did have a connection to the bank. We're trying to establish what that connection was to the business, but it appears he was a previous employee.
There was no immediate word on the suspect's motive, but CNN cited a law enforcement source saying he had just been informed he was losing his job. Gwen Villaruel said that 3 people were in critical condition, including a police officer who took a bullet to the head.
This is awful. I have a very close friend that didn't make it today. And I have another close friend who didn't either, and one who's at the hospital that I hope is going to make it through. So when we talk about praying, I hope people will.
President Joe Biden, who is pushing for lawmakers in Washington to break a years-long deadlock and take action against gun violence, voiced frustration after this latest senseless killings. Too many Americans are paying for the price of inaction with their lives, Biden wrote on Twitter, adding, "When will Republicans in Congress act to protect our communities?" Efforts to tighten gun controls have for years run up against opposition from Republicans, staunch defenders of the constitutional right to bear arms. The political paralysis endures despite widespread outrage over recurring shootings. In this latest illustration of the deadlock, 2 Tennessee lawmakers were expelled from the state legislature last week after staging a floor protest calling for tougher gun control in the wake of a deadly shooting at an elementary school in Nashville. Monday's mass shooting in Louisville was the 146th of the year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines such acts as incidents in which 4 or more people were shot or killed, excluding the assailant. In tonight's other news, Vietnam will probe TikTok over toxic content hosted by the hugely popular Chinese-owned video app, according to officials. TikTok has an estimated 50 million users in Vietnam, according to data from research firm Data Reporter cited by the government. The app already faces growing pressure from Western governments over fears that user data could be used or abused by Chinese officials. It was fined in Britain this week and banned from official devices in Australia. The head of Vietnam's radio, TV, and electronic information, Lee Quang Tu Do, said the Information Department would organize an inter-ministerial inspection of the company in May. Now, Mr. Do told reporters TikTok has no effective control measures over content which violates politics against party and state, fake news, toxic content. The lack of control, he said, was facilitating the dissemination of fake news, causing losses in economy and social instability. Mr. Do said the ministry asks cross-border platforms to strictly follow Vietnamese laws. And finally, rice, Asia's most important staple, is to blame for around 10% of global emissions of methane, a gas that over 2 decades traps about 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide. And now scientists are saying that if the world wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, rice cannot be ignored. Vietnam has been showing efforts to reduce methane from rice cultivation by removing straw from the fields and turning it into mushrooms and organic fertilizer. Let's take a look.
What accounts for 10% of global emissions of methane? It's not belching cows or landfills, but rice. Scientists say if the world wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the staple crop cannot be ignored. Farmer Dong Van Khan has joined a scheme to recycle straw from his fields instead of burning it.
Nhưng mà theo tôi thấy tốt hết á, là như mình phát triển bên cái hữu cơ này nhiều. thì cái vụ mà ô nhiễm môi trường nó sẽ giảm. Mà mình được có cái lợi luôn. Thay vì hồi ngày xưa.
Methane is generated by bacteria that grow in flooded rice paddies and thrive if the leftover straw rots. Over time, methane traps about 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide.
So rice, which sets them apart from other crops, has a standing water layer in the field, which means there's no exchange of air between the soil and the atmosphere. So that means you have in the soil anaerobic conditions, and that means there are different bacteria active in the soil than you would find in wheat or maize.
As part of an initiative by the International Rice Research Institute, Khan now removes the straw from his fields and turns it into other products, earning a small income on the side.
Tại vì cái thứ nhất là bán gom được, có thu nhập, có tiền. Thứ hai là trồng nấm, nấm được thu hoạch cũng có tiền. Và thứ ba, bán cái phụ phẩm của nấm đó, rồi cái bã rơm đó, về đây tới bên đây mua để làm phân hữu cơ lại đó.
Under the Global Methane Pledge, Vietnam and several other major rice producers in Asia have vowed to cut emissions by 30% between 2020 and 2030. But the two largest producers, China and India, failed to sign. And while Mekong farmers like Khan have taken a step towards more sustainable farming, for now he is part of a small minority.
As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles, staying in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.